even on a good day, it's hard for a business owner to get a bank loan. It's
How does it go now, though?
It's weeks and months of paperwork, of loan officer meetings, of completing applications and submitting more documentation and writing business plans and creating projections.
This is one of the things that I absolutely love about women small business owners. I just think we collaborate better. Like, I'm so excited for this audience to call you up and say, hey, I got this idea from what you said, and here, do you think it would be useful? Or, oh my gosh, I've been looking for a way to do this. I'm so glad that somebody's going to be raising money.
Welcome to Seriously Catherine, a self-confidence podcast for women who want to be taken seriously in the world of business. Here's your guest host.
Hey everybody, welcome to Seriously Catherine. I am your guest host today, Noa Simmons. I am the co-founder and CEO of a new company called GoodBread, and I'm excited to talk about my entrepreneurial journey here today. And my, sort of getting to the end of what I'm hoping for, I would really love for you to join me in the process of building this brand new company aimed at improving access to capital for women and people of color and people who are entrepreneurs who have been historically marginalized by the banking system. I'm really excited to be here hosting this podcast, first of 4 episodes that I decided to name Access and the American Dream. I want to talk about my own purpose in life and the work that I'm doing in building GoodBread, which is a small business lending platform. Since this is a podcast for female entrepreneurs primarily, I am excited to talk about my own entrepreneurial journey and a little bit of what I'm doing and how I've done it and why. For the past 8 years, I have been running the Upstate Capital Association of New York and been working with entrepreneurs in and around access to capital, both directly in the upstate New York community and more broadly worldwide for over 20 years. This week's episode is brought to you by GoodBread, a startup revolutionizing the way small business owners access capital. And GoodBread feels kind of like my senior thesis on how do we improve access to capital for Main Street business owners. I started the business a couple of years ago, and I'm getting it off the ground now and hoping to have help from people like you. I'd love for you to come join me on the journey and become beta users and informal advisors to me as I build this lending platform to make access to capital easier. I'm hoping that you'll be inspired by people building new products to meet people's needs in the space. I hope that you'll develop an appreciation for why entrepreneurship is so important. I have a special guest with me here today, my very own big sister, Rebecca Simmons. She has known me longer than pretty much every other person on the planet. So I thought it would be a great way for the audience here to get some inside knowledge and understanding of how I got to be where I am today. But before we get to all that, here's my hot take for the day. Katy Perry is leaving American Idol. Now, I have to tell you, this is not generally something that I would think of as self-defining for me, but American Idol is one of those guilty pleasures that I have been watching for many years. I view it as somewhat of a, chill out moment, also a little bit of relationship maintenance in my marriage. So it's a nice time for us to have something that we can talk about that isn't the kids. So Katy Perry's been a host for a number of years, and her whole thing is about empowering people and actually self-determination is a theme that you will hear a lot in her music. But I remember in this last season, she said something to one of the competitors, actually Loretta Lynn's granddaughter, who you could see just struggling so hard with confidence on the stage. And she said, confidence is a decision. I took that to mean that when you are getting ready to go out on stage and you're getting ready to show up for your next big moment, you can decide that you're going to show up in a confident way. Self-confidence is a huge challenge. I think there are so many different ways for us to second guess ourselves. There are so many ways to take in information from the outside world on second guessing ourselves. And I do believe that confidence is a decision every day. My own version of showing up with confidence has to do with breathing in a moment of clarity, of grounding, of finding my center place, and then showing up with my full self. And I think that's what Katy Perry meant when she said that. Katy Perry hasn't always been on there, and it took me a minute to get used to her. So I'm sure I'll get used to whoever else shows up after Katy Perry. But she's been a real joy to get to know through American Idol and a real inspiration. I think her career will probably do better. Okay, so today's serious business lesson is on listening. I want to talk just for a minute about active listening and how important I find it as a leader to inform how I communicate and engage with customers and teammates and potential investors and my broader community. So spoiler alert, I learned a lot of this from couples therapy. So I would say the listening skills are best developed in close relationships where you have a real vested interest in the outcomes of those conversations and of the listening and the hearing. But I think there are some principles of active listening that are very helpful to remember. I personally try to employ when I'm trying to engage with people directly and really establish a rapport. And so active listening means you are attentive and you're aware and you're completely focused. And when the person is done talking, you reflect back some of what you heard. And then there's a step of empathizing with them if it's appropriate. So if there's something that came out in the conversation, maybe particularly with like a teammate, they might have said something that gives you an indication of their emotional state. And empathizing with that emotional state really helps people to feel heard and understood and create a place where trust is built and more confidence in the relationship can yield much better results. And so I would encourage everyone to take up active listening as a daily practice in the people that they're interfacing with and see if it moves the needle for you, maybe in places where you have some friction. Well, I want to say I'm so excited to have my first guest here be my big sister, Rebecca Schaefer. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're totally welcome, Noah. I am really excited to support this effort on pitching GoodBread and explaining your whole story about entrepreneurship. And being a guest means I get to boss you a little bit and ask questions, just like when we were kids.
That does remind me of growing up. This might have been an error in judgment.
No, not at all. Because the first question is like, really, why are you a small business person? Why did you become an entrepreneur?
Well, I actually think becoming an entrepreneur has to do with not wanting to get bossed around. So actually that could be totally tied to my childhood experience. But, we grew up in an entrepreneurial family, right? Our dad had a chauffeuring service, a car service, and he had a restaurant, a small cafe. Incidentally, we baked bread every day. And so definitely GoodBread, the name of my small business lending company, is a nod to our growing up experience. But I think, to the sort of philosophy behind your question, entrepreneurship for me has a lot to do with self-actualization. And for me, the ability to materialize my own reality, to define sort of my own success, I think it's really empowering and fraught with risk and fraught with anxiety and heartache and challenge, but
also really, really exciting things. And, from this side, I know that you live in that stressful place on a day-to-day basis as a small business person, but I also get to hear like you talk so excitedly and that passion and, it's not all fight or flight. Some of it is really like, oh my gosh, guess what? And, I don't get that in my corporate job at all.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. It's certainly not all bad or all good. Like most things, there are trade-offs and there's a lot of variety, which I certainly appreciate. But, I think when I think about fundamentally why GoodBread and entrepreneurship for me is a path towards my own self-actualization, but GoodBread for me is a path towards empowering other people to also have that self-actualization.
It's so meta. You're going to actualize yourself by actualizing other people.
Yeah, exactly.
That totally goes along with our whole family thing about like living our lives well as well as supporting other people, finding people who maybe haven't been necessarily respected in their communities or who haven't had all the opportunities that some people get just by virtue of who they are, what family they got birthed into.
What gender they came here with.
Right. What color is their skin? How much education did they have? Where's their family, that family that did like the fourth generation Yale? What are those? The skull and bone people? Is that what they are?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like not everybody got that opportunity. And the idea that wanting to support folks who didn't come into the world with the same advantages, and by world, I mean into the business world, but that it's not surprising to me at all that feels really meaningful to you.
It does feel meaningful. And I think when I was preparing for hosting a podcast and thinking about, well, who am I? How am I showing up? And how does my career trajectory make any sense from, working in a small business in college to going and joining a family office and working around the world in venture capital to coming back to upstate New York, where I'm from originally.
Noa, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about how you started on the small business world and then moved into the venture capital world? Because it was Summit Educational Group, right? You were tutoring for SATs.
Yeah, well, exactly. One of the families that I tutored, the parent was a venture capitalist, and he offered me a job. And he had some really cool projects. And so I said yes, and ended up working alongside him for over a decade. And, what an incredible mentor, an incredible experience seeing the world and diving really deeply into technology analysis and learning the early stage venture capital space.
Yeah.
It was an incredible alternative to business school.
The stuff that I really remember was you spending a whole lot of time studying the assassination of JFK by digitalizing that library, the Mary Farrell Library, and then you were just in China all the time.
Yeah, I think that's right. That sort of sums up those several years of experience.
And in China, that's where you were working in the venture capital space.
Yeah, we set up a venture capital fund in Shanghai with Chinese partners, modeled on the work that Ali had done setting up the investment systems at Battery Ventures. And so I had an office at Battery and an office with our team in Shanghai at TND, and went back and forth sort of translating what we could translate from the US style to China. And then from that platform, went around the world and evaluated different technologies for different business applications.
I think in that experience at TND and Battery, you really worked with larger businesses, larger donors, and you kind of saw how influx of capital could really make big things get bigger and go better. And I remember you talking about how you wish there was a way for that to happen for smaller businesses and for like folks like our dad running a restaurant or having a car service. I wonder if that's kind of how you came around back to GoodBread.
Money can change some circumstances for people. It can also make other things happen that aren't so desirous. But in the business world, injections of capital at the right time for the right purpose can have a real material impact on the trajectory of that business. In America, small businesses make up 50% of the American economy. There are 33 million small businesses in the United States. About, I think, 6 million are employer firms, so have, employees. When you think about the magnitude of employing a significant, I want to say it's 50% of America's population work in small businesses. And there are 6 million of them that have employees, 33 million overall. It's a huge market, right? It's a huge opportunity. And access to capital for them is a real challenge. And I've been living in this place with since coming back to upstate New York and running the Upstate Capital Association, where our mission is to increase access to capital for companies and deal flow for investors. I've just witnessed in so many different dimensions how accessing capital is such a challenge for entrepreneurs and small business owners of all types.
Maybe we should have not skipped Upstate Capital and to include that in the trajectory
here.
So, right. So you went from doing the T&D and battery back and forth to China, and then you came back to upstate New York and kind of settled in, got married, and started thinking about having some roots. And how did you get connected to Upstate Capital?
I got connected to Upstate Capital because I started an angel investment fund that sort of not exactly mirrored what we were doing in the venture fund, but took some of those principles and brought them local, brought them to a place-based investment fund, looking at how do we help support high growth potential companies in the Hudson Valley where I live. So the Hudson Valley Startup Fund was the stepping stone between the work that I was doing with TND and starting GoodBread and Upstate Capital. So Upstate Capital is the 8 years in between now, here and then.
And so Upstate, as the listeners might not know what Upstate Capital does.
Yeah, Upstate Capital, it's the Upstate Capital Association of New York. It has been in existence since 2003. It's a 501c6 membership association supporting investors in accessing deal flow opportunities, which in turn helps companies access capital because they're investors who are active in this region.
So we're bringing people who need money together with the people who have money.
Yeah, well, theoretically, yes. And that is in practice what happens. The mission of the organization is really focused around investors and how do we best support, best meet needs of investors who want to be doing deals in upstate New York.
And so the part that I said about money meeting need may be actually more like GoodBread. Yeah,
right. Exactly. Through running Upstate Capital, have obviously built a really strong network, including meeting Catherine, whose podcast I've taken over here for a couple of episodes. And so I've worked with other community builders in the community building work that I've done with Upstate Capital. But I've gotten a lot of insight into just the challenges that people face as small business owners and as entrepreneurs on the other side of that coin. And part of it is that, there are two other, I would say, very relevant experiences. One was me applying for a loan myself for a company that I co-founded to manage food waste. So the community compost company. I went and applied to the local savings bank for an equipment loan and got turned down. The process of applying was really challenging and took many weeks and a lot of paperwork, and the outcome obviously was not what we wanted. So that direct experience, coupled with literally consulting hundreds of entrepreneurs and small business owners on their challenges with getting bank financing, getting any kind of equity financing, figuring out how to fund growth in their business is a real challenge. And there's a ton of opportunity to demystify and to streamline the avenues for people to be able to get funding that they need that will help them grow their business.
You said that there are 33 million small businesses in this country, and you've said that it's hard to get capital. What are they doing now? How will it be different if they have GoodBread?
Well, I'll start with, 50 years ago, Jimmy knew Bob. Jimmy was the banker and Bob had the bakery, and Bob would go and say, Jimmy, I need 10 grand to buy a new pizza. Well, maybe 10 grand was a lot of money back then, but you get the idea. There was a relationship-based transaction, right? Like the local bank knew the local business and made lending decisions based on personal knowledge.
Right. So they might know that Bob was, really good at the bakery and had really good baked goods to sell. But like Jerry down the street, who was an alcoholic, maybe they weren't going to choose to support his bar when he wanted to buy something else because it really looked not so good. Maybe we shouldn't bring alcohol into the store.
Maybe we'll just cut.
But it does make sense to me that like if you know the business owner and you know the business, then you're going to feel a lot more comfortable to support it. Because that small town banker really knew the small town business person and had a grasp of what's happening in the community, what needs are there, and what needs will they meet.
Yeah, that's right. And I think 50 years ago, another really relevant data point is that there were 4,000 banking licenses in the U.S. And today there are fewer than 2,000 banking licenses in the U.S. because there's been massive consolidation in the market. And there is great evidence that when banks consolidate, they merge, they acquire one another, they get bigger and bigger. lending decisions leave the community and go somewhere else.
So Citibank didn't know anything about compost in New Paltz.
Exactly. So Citibank would have never given us a loan to buy a screener to screen our compost. We didn't go to Citibank. We also went to a local bank. It was a separate set of issues, but related for sure. Banks historically, they've just been a lot of consolidation, a lot of changes. And even on a good day, it's hard for a business owner to get a bank loan. It's
How does it go now, though?
It's weeks and months of paperwork, of loan officer meetings, of completing applications and submitting more documentation and writing business plans and creating projections. And it's a many-step process. If you're going for some sort of a SBA guaranteed loan, it's a great program, there is another layer on top in terms of paperwork and time that it takes to get those loans.
So if you're a small business owner and you don't have the skills to do all those things that you just mentioned, what options do they have right now?
There are some very good counseling centers that can help business owners navigate these systems. The Small Business Development Center, where I actually spent 18 months as a business advisor a number of years ago, which, again, great insight into the challenges that the people that we're looking to serve face. There are a lot of avenues for people to go. They don't necessarily yield the results ultimately, and they're enormously time consuming. And so if you're an entrepreneur, time is I guess anybody in the world, right? Time is your most precious resource. And especially as an entrepreneur, you need to be thinking every minute of every day, like, how are you spending this very precious resource? Because it's finite. And so a lot of what my mission has to do with is making things more efficient for creditworthy business owners.
I remember you telling me this when you first started talking about GoodBread, that something like half of small business owners, instead of getting any kind of loan, just max their credit cards. That can't be good in this economy.
Well, or in any economy, really. Leaning on your personal credit to fund your business limits its growth. And when you have limited its growth, you increase the likelihood of failure. There are a lot of sort of downstream effects of not optimizing growth at the time when, not taking capital when you need it.
I was really surprised when I learned that people who run small businesses couldn't get even what seems like a relatively small amount of money as a reasonable loan. Well,
to your point about a small amount of money, traditional banking underwriting has been incredibly manual and labor intensive on the bank side. And what that has meant is that if their underwriting costs start at $3,000 or $4,000 and go up from there, they can't underwrite loans less than $200,000 economically because the math doesn't work. And so banks historically have had a really hard time making loans in the range where GoodBread will make loans, which is between $5,000 and $100,000.
So you talked about in the old days, the bankers knew the business guys. And so they had a trust relationship and the lender knew about the loan acceptor's character. What's GoodBread going to do about that?
Well, right. So there are the 5 C's of credit, and character is one of those 5 C's. I haven't really gotten into the origin story of GoodBread. I have a business partner, a co-founder, who is a venture capitalist. And when he and I met, he'd written a book about entrepreneurship. His name is Seth. Seth had written a book about entrepreneurship in America today and had found access to capital as one of the major challenges that small business owners face in starting and growing businesses. So he and I put our heads together and said, we really want to work on a solution for this. And we thought about, how do we make decisions as early stage investors based on the person in front of us? And it is a character assessment that we're making with our own personal judgment. And so then the question was, well, could we create an automated way to do that reduced human bias, reduced human error, and increased the chances that people could get funding if there is a character assessment model to lean on in the underwriting process?
So basically, you are using that same kind of data, but in a less individual lens kind of perspective, a more objective assessment of character, which is one of the aspects that happened anyway in the old days, but is hard when your bank is based in Washington, D.C. or in Maryland.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
where the banks are.
Well, exactly. So the hypothesis for GoodBread is that we can underwrite credit risks for small businesses looking at financials. Does this business have the ability to repay this loan? Overlaid with the character and behavior of the small business owner. So we designed our own proprietary character assessment test, working with a social scientist from the University of Rochester. In that assessment and building that assessment, we asked questions like, how much grit does this person have? How much perseverance do they have? How suited are they to be an entrepreneur? And then we asked questions around how important is it to this person to repay loans, to manage debt? And with those kind of two sort of vectors, we came to review a large body of literature and academic work that's been done on this topic. We refined that down into a proprietary assessment that we designed and then tested with a couple thousand people. And now, as we start to make loans, we will use that assessment as part of the application process. Mm-hmm. We're not going to lean on what the computer tells us right now, obviously, because we need to make loans and collect loan data to be able to validate the model. But the vision is in a couple of years, we will have made a several hundred loans, and we'll have a fair degree of confidence in the character assessment as one piece of our underwriting system that we could lean on. And hopefully that'll help us get away from things like credit score, which can be misleading, particularly for small business owners.
Right. So the character is a really important piece, and you guys have developed your own software as a credit assessment tool based on literature and science. You've tested it, and now, although you're not going to rely on that as like a main feature in the early stages because you need it to be proven in vivo with actual people and businesses that you're going to lend to. So that's a really cool feature. You said that there were 5 C's of
credit. Yeah.
5 C's of credit, and character is one of them. What are the other 4?
Collateral, capacity, conditions. Capacity is actually the one that we're most challenged to underwrite.
So you mentioned there were 5 C's, and that character is the main one that we've talked about for how GoodBread is going to assess that and use information about character to make small business loans. What are the other really important parts of GoodBread?
We have a thesis, but we're doing a lot of testing to find out if our thesis is right. The other thesis, or the other vector of exploration that we have, is around behavior. So I know from being a consultant and working with lots of business owners, we've had this validated from a number of other sources, that if you're working with somebody and you give them a homework assignment and they do the homework assignment, they're more likely to do what they say they're going to do. Not shocking, maybe. Right. Maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know.
I find that not surprising, but one of the things that I think is really interesting that we're working on through GoodBread is how do we give little homework assignments and then see if people have done them, and then obviously measure the content of those assignments also. But for an example, we're asking people to upload a picture that represents their business, or maybe a couple of images that represent their business. It could be a snapshot of your storefront or your website, or something that's representative of what you do. And so there's a little checkbox. Did you do it? Did you not do it? And it's not a qualitative analysis of the photo. It's just, did you do this small thing that we asked for? And that's unusual. If you go through an online lending process, an online application now with any of the
standard bank
or non-bank financial lenders, there isn't a lot of personalization like that in the application. And so we have this character piece, we have some behavioral components that we are integrating into the application flow. And again, we have hypotheses about these things, and we have experiments to run and test. We don't presume that we have the answers, but we're really excited to explore the space here because the payoff for people will be great.
So GoodBread doesn't have all the answers right now. You've had really smart people and Seth partnering with you with his experience about entrepreneurship, and then these folks at University of Rochester doing the psychological piece of it. And what you're really doing is you're creating like a living thing. GoodBread is, you've got yeast in there and we don't know exactly how it's going to go, but you've got all these pieces that you're evaluating, and sounds like you'll be fine tuning it as you have more investors come in, as you make more loans, you'll be able to really say, okay, this thing really helped us to predict that this type of small owner is going to be committed to paying back their loan and has a sense of that their business is going to grow as a result of this loan.
Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the interesting things that I've been working on with the pallet community and with Catherine particularly is in what happens after you make the loan. Even the best laid plans, right? Like loans don't always go nothing really goes according to plan. It's important to have a plan, but then you can be pretty sure that things aren't going to go according to that plan. So one of the things that we're exploring with GoodBread and organizations like Pallet, and Pallet's actually one of our initial pilot partners for this, is to have a three-way conversation that is ongoing about, first, in terms of vouching, like getting some community vouching for this loan, maybe from the leader of the community or through some other mechanism. But when people are applying, listing the community that they're part of as a reference that we could check. And then on the backside of the loan, once loans are made, if things aren't going exactly to plan, that we've all agreed to go back to the association that is supporting this business in very real ways to help them right the ship. And so this is another sort of, I think a lot of the magic in GoodBread is going to be in this community
relationships,
right? And that we, ultimately, we don't want to just make a small business loan. We want to be the growth partner. We want to be the lending partner of choice for our customers. And we want to meet them where they are in their local communities.
So would that kind of be a backdoor mentorship almost? Or is it, I guess I'm not sure, will that person who's going back to check in, is that somebody from GoodBread, or is that the person in the community that vouched for the small business?
Number two is what I'm envisioning. I mean, again, like we have some hypotheses that we're going to test and see how it goes.
Oh, so I just gave you another good idea. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm not going to say that's the first time we thought of it, but sure. If you want credit for that, I will totally give it to you.
Big sisters always want the credit.
They always want the credit. We are envisioning this as GoodBread itself really is the lending vehicle. It's a lending platform. And we try to keep that as simple and efficient and scalable as possible. And then all of the things that are kind of getting into the weeds with individual business owners are happening at a local level through our partners.
Got it. So it's the connections that are getting made partly through GoodBread, but that in the bigger picture, the idea of GoodBread is to get get the lending done at a lower cost so that it's still financially viable and productive to make smaller loans to small businesses because that's what they need.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You hit it right on the head. There are millions of options. I mean, maybe not millions, but certainly hundreds, if not thousands of options for people to go access capital and go apply for loans. It's a very crowded market. And so it's kind of shocking that it's quite so poorly served. But it is poorly served. And you see that in a lot of the loan rates that non-bank online lenders can charge. They can often be up to 90% of the APR of the actual loan amount. It's not uncommon for them to go that high, certainly mid-30s, up to 90, and I've heard as high as 400%. So
if I'm a small business owner and I ask you for $100,000, that means I might have to pay you back $400,000?
At the high end, at the highest end.
Ever. That's what you've ever heard.
But it's not unusual for it to be 150.
Right.
Yeah.
I have to be really, really successful. It has to go perfectly. Nothing else can go wrong.
Well, it's you want to be sure that the money that you're taking and is going to buy something that's going to be able to repay that.
Right. But if GoodBread can do it at a rate where GoodBread is still making money for the investors, but not costing the small business owner an additional $50,000, that's the sweet spot. That's the GoodBread.
That's right. It'll be definitely something south of $50,000. And of course, we're still working out the math of this specifically, and it's going to depend a little bit on the loan products that our target audience needs. If it's a short-term working capital versus a longer-term loan. There may be inventory financing. We're starting with simple term loans for set periods of time, but with the thesis that we are making these loans to help people invest in their growth.
Right. I guess my appeal about it not costing $50,000 is the appeal to the small business owner who wants to use GoodBread, but the investor who's investing in GoodBread might be very excited about that $50,000. So it's a little bit of social responsibility too. It sounds like it's both going to be profitable and that good piece of supporting the small businesses in balance.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you so much again for being here. I'm really excited about what's to come for GoodBread. We're just in the middle of closing our first investment round. We are going to be ready to make loans. We're aiming for the fourth quarter of 2024, so a couple of months away. And right now, what I'm hoping to do is have the people who are listening to this podcast reach out to us at goodbread.net. Share your information if you're interested in becoming a beta user, an informal advisor to me as I build the product and define the loan products and start to make our initial loans. So would love to have people from the community really involved on the ground level in helping build what we're building, because we're building this for small business owners. So we'd really love your input.
This is one of the things that I absolutely love about women small business owners. I just think we collaborate better. I'm so excited for this audience to call you up and say, hey, I got this idea from what you said, and here, do you think it would be useful? Or, oh my gosh, I've been looking for a way to do this. I'm so glad that somebody's going to be raising money to run something like this. I'm very excited for you.
Thank you. I'm very excited for us too. Today's Saratoga Living After Hours segment features a local dive bar called Quarters. Now, their feature on Saratoga Living highlights the rich history. I think the bar opened in 1982, so almost as long as I've been alive, but not quite. Rich history, lots of rich characters, lots of fun things to do if you're into dive bars, which I am. I'm going to say I definitely really enjoyed dive bars in my earlier life. I always wanted to be a pool shark, and I'm going to say I didn't quite get there in college, but I definitely gave it a good shot. So if you're into that sort of thing, Quarters on Saratoga Living's After Hours, where they feature lots of cool spots around town. I want to say thanks again so much to my sister Rebecca for being here today. I think this was a really fun conversation and fun for me to get into some of the how and the why for myself. And I appreciate her also not digging too deeply into some of the family history that could always come out. But I think this was a great conversation, and I hope you guys got something out of it.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. And if you want to connect with me, slide into my DMs on Instagram. My handle is Catherine Hover.